And I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about the exhibition, about kind of how it came about and what your intentions were putting it on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jake. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming, because it's really nice to be able to talk about this. So it actually started before, pre-pandemic kind of times and stuff, and it was an exciting opportunity because there was a space available in London to Carousel Gallery to put an exhibition on, and I'd been painting around some themes before, kind of around the idea of encounter, and it occurred to me, I was thinking, I know so many painters, and I know a lot of painters from where I studied at Royal Drawing School, and from beyond that as well, where I was thinking, I can see there's something which kind of feels like a theme, which is running not just in what I'm kind of trying to approach, but was in a lot of other people's work, but was kind of coming out with a real sense of plurality. There were loads of different approaches, but perhaps a feeling that I could recognize. And I was just almost thinking, I'd love to be able to show alongside these people. It's an idea which I feel is kind of ambiguous, about this idea of where your work begins at the point of encounter. For myself, it was often about painting from life, and with most of the artists involved, there was this sort of paper trail of work that led up to a piece, or kind of like stood behind it. And I think really there was something about trying to put together quite a diverse kind of range of artists, which, if anything, almost in a nice way kind of reaffirms everyone's individual approach in this. I think that's often been something in my own history, about wanting to sort of find a voice, and it was kind of really odd in a way, in a really positive way, of bringing together some artists where I feel like there is something between everyone that's shared in approach, but is coming out really, really differently, and with their own identities, and feeling like, well, actually, this could be an opportunity then for all of us to hold that up as a question, kind of thing, in our work. A lot of it actually also was based around a quote I'd read by John Berger, where he's talking about, it was actually in this book called The Shape of a Pocket, and in that he basically says, painting is first an affirmation of the visible which surrounds us and which continually appears and disappears. Without the disappearing, there would be perhaps no impulse to paint, for then the visible itself would possess the surety which painting strives to find. More directly than any other art, painting is an affirmation of the existent, of the physical world into which mankind has been thrown. And way back in, I think it was March, because the show was supposed to be on in April originally, so it must have been before that, actually, in February we were talking about it, and I was chatting with one of the other artists, Michael Chance, and we were talking about that quote, and then from that the sort of title came up, kind of thing, about this is where, there's actually a book by John Berger called Here Is Where We Meet, and this idea of a sort of coming together kind of thing felt kind of right, not only sort of physically but kind of conceptually, about this is where we meet in this point of encounter. And then lockdown begins, and it kind of got kicked into the long grass for quite a bit, and there were a few potential sort of times where we were going to resurrect it, and then January became available, and even up until, it was funny actually, because even up until the last sort of couple of weeks, there was the feeling like, oh, actually this possibly could just go ahead in person, and in anticipation of that, I sort of thought, well, if we're going to struggle to get numbers in anyway, perhaps maybe we could be looking at doing a 3D scan of the exhibition. And I'd seen Ellie, who's here tonight, a 3D scan of her show, which was the Jonathan Vickers, I think, Ellie, if you're not yet, awards. And I got in touch with that company, and yeah, they were delighted to help. And so I ended up applying for lottery funding. And and that was actually that was a really interesting process. It was a long process, and I had a lot of, I think some of the artists here, especially, their phones were burning as I was ringing them to try and get some okays on the way I was writing and presenting the whole thing. But it was really interesting actually, because we got that, and that kind of actually untied our hands in a way. It allowed us to think, okay, this is going to be the same amount of effort is going into this. We're going to hang a physical show, but the 3D scan is it wasn't just an idea of a sort of fallback. It was almost like a way to get further, perhaps. And given how actually, you know, most of us have realized that a lot of content we've joined in with or something in the past year has been, we've actually had opportunities to go further than the UK, I think, and meet people beyond that than we normally would. That seemed more like an opportunity rather than a compromise kind of thing. And then coming to January and, you know, lockdown happening, actually that then became the vehicle for the show kind of carrying on. So that was I think that's the sort of story of it kind of happening. It was quite interesting actually approaching all the artists, because lots of them were like, huh, great lineup. You know, like, oh, brilliant. Don't get a show alongside them normally, you know, and that was a really nice sensation actually, because loads of the painters are just my peers, so I'm sort of going, oh, love your work, love your work. And actually it's a really nice chance to almost have a bit of a kind of feel of going, we wouldn't be able to show maybe, or we wouldn't perhaps be showing together in these other channels that might normally be there. And it just so happened in the end that it ended up, you know, that it actually was a lot of painters who actually had a sort of Royal Drawing School connection in a way. And that also, in terms of ideas, wasn't so much a surprise in a way. It was a feeling that actually maybe there is something in the approaches that we're drawn to, at least, which sort of found itself coming from that background, maybe. But then there's also Archie Franks, who was he's Royal Academy, and there's some others who are Royal College as well. So it's an interesting mix, but I do think despite the sort of diversity and stuff, there is something you can see in the work, I think, which kind of hangs together.
I thought so. I mean, there was quite a very strong sort of visual thread while still being incredibly varied. Is this the first exhibition you've curated?
Yeah, and it's funny, really. I'm way more of a team player than you know, and I think this putting me in this situation kind of is, it's been funny because I think I've done a lot of there's been a lot of background stuff, but actually you know, we had limited numbers anyway in terms of actually who could come to the gallery to hang the show and things on the day, and we were all masked up and things. And Ellie and Eleanor Watson and Michael Chance, they were there to sort of do the hang as well, kind of thing. And to be honest with you, that's actually where you know, I'm bringing together, I was sort of perhaps involved in going a big arm sweep, going, how about let's all do this, you know, kind of thing. But in the actual curatorial process, it was really nice actually for it to be quite dynamic and have, you know, have a thing where sort of Michael and Ellie would go, they look really good together, you know, or something. And then I'm like, oh, you're right. And then I might made a dud and gone, how about this? And it's like, no, okay. And but it was sort of funny actually, because I do feel like this is where maybe a good strength of the show is that it feels like it's a very what's the word for it, quite a sort of democratic hang of an exhibition. You know, it feels like there's a good balance kind of thing between all the artists and all the work shown. I don't think without a sort of little team to kind of hang, we would have been able to get that, I think. Yeah.
And as far as the 3D scanning goes and the digital presentation of it, presentation of it, how have you found interacting with the work in that space? And did you get a lot of say over where the viewing points were kind of placed around the gallery? So I think in this next image, you can really see how somebody might navigate by kind of clicking on all of these dots, sort of Google Maps style. It's actually surprisingly engaging. I mean, I've been around this exhibition several times and actually really been able to get into the work, although you haven't got that sense of physical space and scale. Actually, the context of the gallery, being able to see that, really elevates it beyond being just a whole load of JPEGs, you know, just one after another. You do see their relationship to one another. And how was that experience, kind of putting all of that side together?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because one of the options was actually to do a sort of a mock-up space rather than a real space. And I'd looked at other options for doing that, and that would have had that feeling of more like a JPEG in a kind of early 90s video game kind of thing. I think this is kind of interesting because it does feel, it was kind of surprising, the result, because it was like, huh, that's exactly what it's like to be there, you know. And I think also there's something about, I mean, it's a super high quality kind of thing, the sort of gizmos they were using. And there's something quite interesting really, because when, you know, when some of the paintings kind of thing, when you're actually in the exhibition, you know, if there's slight aspects of lighting that would have been nicer to kind of change or something, weirdly the camera compensates. So you're actually getting almost like a feeling of the paintings each being given their like quite a lot of due attention kind of thing, because the way that the scan would work, it would kind of, I think, like auto adjust kind of thing, the lights, as it got near paintings and stuff. So you've actually got quite a sort of more than, it's not more than 3D, but you know, a sort of quite a sort of HD feel to real life kind of thing to it somehow. And I think as well that maybe that was a nice thing, as we go on throughout the evening as well. It'd be interesting to see what the others feel about that, you know, seeing their work, those who weren't able to come and hang, actually be able to see that in situ without actually having been there, but get something pretty close to feeling like that. In terms of the control over where the points are, not really. Hand that over to them, because that's the, as in the V21, the people who scan the space, who are super lovely people, and they sort of have such confidence in them. It was like they know, you know, how this is going to read, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's also like, because I've never, you know, I don't think any of us, I'll say apart from Ellie, maybe has had an experience of seeing their work like this. I think it was almost like a bit of a surprise to see how it would come out, but just really happy, really. So yeah.
Fantastic. Now, we're just going to delve a bit more into that work. So what I'm going to do is just click through the work of some of the artists that are here with us tonight and just ask them a little bit about an individual piece in the exhibition. Geraint, you're up first, if that's okay. And I've just got this piece from the exhibition. So it's the closer we are. This is the full length piece. I do have some close-ups as well that I can cycle through, but I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about it. Tell us a bit about how it came about and the story behind it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. What you're looking at is the result of a lot of time spent with a voluntary litter picking group in Cardiff. They're basically called Cardiff Rivers Group, and they literally get together on Sundays and clean the river banks and actually go into the rivers as well and pull out all the detritus that sort of sadly ends up in there in South Wales. And I basically spent time with them volunteering, but also drawing them from observation and taking the odd photograph as well. And this is sort of part of like a broader project of mine where I've sort of been looking for a long time for a kind of social function within my work. And well, I say been looking, it's always been a factor in it, but being so involved in sort of making figurative art, there's a nice sort of way of connecting to everyone. in situations that aren't just reserved for the gallery space. So that's kind of what, broadly speaking, what I'm trying to do, to pick these pathways towards a better future. So I go out and I volunteer with groups, sort of volunteers, charities, industries who are working towards the same and drawing from observation. So I spend a lot of time with them. They're amazing. They're like, they sort of pick up anything, from like wet wipes to literally pulling like burnt out cars out of the river. They're incredible. And I basically I go and draw them, and I'm sort of trying to get something of the figure in action. And I'm also trying to get something of the space. And I got to say, my ratio of success with both those things are quite tricky, especially with figures moving around. But to be honest with you, in terms of like making observational drawings, which is a big, what Tim mentioned, is, you know, capturing the experience of being there, and using drawing as a tool for looking and creating memories that actually are valuable for me back in the studio. So a lot of these drawings, although they're quite messy, are really useful in the distillation process that goes into making something like this.
And does that kind of contribute, almost sort of placing the viewer in the space, contribute to the sort of panoramic layout of this particular image? Because I felt like kind of walking along it. I mean, we've just got a few close-ups here. You really sort of feel like you're in it with that sort of almost like tapestry-like visual language of the long image. Was that to kind of place the viewer in the space, or was it sort of a different kind of narrative device?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's something I'm really aware of, the importance of having like a peripheral sort of format, and it's something I've played with more in the past, where it's really about making an observational drawing that takes the viewer to that position, like a sort of sharing my experience with them and really wrapping the space around them. Although I'm aware of that, this image actually kind of fights against that for one of the first times for me, where I've actually set sort of pictorial boundaries for myself to play within. So this actually, I feel, acts more like a tapestry or a frieze, where you've got things happening in the foreground and then this composite background space. And the format actually does more, I think, to drive the narrative than it does necessarily wrap the peripheral vision. But it is something, yeah, I'm aware of, do, and it's sort of an effect of this as well. So I understand.
Possibly slightly lost Geraint there. Tim, what was it like kind of curating this in the space as well? With such a large piece, so there's something so big to actually accommodate in the exhibition, and obviously something that needs closeness, you know, that you really need to be able to get up in front of. Was it hard to place it in the gallery?
You know what? No, we chatted to Geraint about this, because this was by far the sort of the longest kind of piece kind of thing, you know, despite being quite slim. And I think, you know, it was funny actually, because the actual exhibition space had some additions to it which we didn't have, which we hadn't anticipated basically in the upstairs space. When you go around the 3D, you'll see there are these sort of large kind of constructions and stuff with bits and bobs in. And actually, originally we were going to ask if we could have Geraint's work up there, and we would have built one of these constructions that he's done, because I think, Geraint, am I right in saying those are normally actually part of your, they're actually part of it in a sense, in regards to when you're making it? Yeah, and it's...
yeah, that's right. It's a kind of in construction, if you like. It's sort of that kind of like construction site facade is something I'm quite interested in employing in the work.
Mm-hmm. It seemed appropriate to the narrative of this as well. You know, there's almost a sense of the reclaimed in the setup. But
yeah.
Something I really like doing is kind of building these drawing installations. I wouldn't say this is an installation as such, but like having some sort of factor where there's like a texture or even a...
Oh, we lost you for a moment there, Geraint. Sorry, it's slightly poor connection.
No, it's happening, I think. Yeah, have you got me now?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay. I was just saying that, yeah, having some part of like a physical texture within it is installation-esque background where drawings played a part in that. But like I've often used soundscapes as well. Effect.
And at the moment, you're at your studio or at home in Cardiff, is that right? At the moment?
Yeah, I'm based in South Wales. Yeah, and yeah, I live in Cardiff. My studio's here too.
And are you able to make work at the moment during this lockdown? Have you sort of found it productive, or has it been a struggle?
No, I have found it a very productive time, actually. I mean, like, I think one thing artists often share is this, how useful isolation can be for making work, and it has its challenges. But I've actually been working on a more of a public art project that will bring some of these kind of images to like urban environments. So actually exterior wearing works of this nature and larger in scale as well.
Mm-hmm. And with the people that are in this, have they seen the work? Like, what's their relationship to it?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, they have seen it. Yeah, and I do talk to them about it, and they're really pleased to be in it. I think they're also quite humble people. I keep losing.
We do keep losing you a touch, but actually it's probably taking us on to our next image, if that's okay. So that's been really fascinating to be able to hear more about that work. So I'm sorry we lost you a few times there, but thank you so much for all of that context. I'm just going to click everyone through just for a moment more. But we're next going to go on to Rachel. So Rachel Mercer is one of the painters in the show, and this painting, Alone Again, is the focus of our next few minutes. And Rachel, I think maybe just launch in, tell us a bit about the work.
Sure. So the show is about encounters, and I think this piece was about an encounter with the world. It's an encounter with the self as well. And I think it's a physical and an emotional encounter. And I think largely my work is figures, and they are confronting the world in some way. And I think this one, more than any of my other work perhaps, has this sort of real feeling of anxiety, that sort of confrontation being an anxious one, and it's explored kind of through the body and the way the figure has the tension in the shoulders, and that there's an ambiguity whether she's kind of coming out or whether there's an opening or a withdrawal there, and that's kind of what I was focusing on. And so and I feel like there's a very different encounter. Perhaps there's the sort of the position of the body suggests one thing, but then the encounter with that's expressed by the face is something quite different. Perhaps the body could be seen as quite an erotic encounter, an encounter with something we don't know what that is, but she's reacting to something that we can't see that's out of the picture, and that might be an erotic and an encounter, but it's also where she looks withdrawn in her expression, So there's that tension.
As viewer, do you have an idea of kind of who we are as viewer? Because just thinking she's not looking at a reflection of herself, so we are not her. We are not necessarily the protagonist that she is looking towards. Are we a voyeur looking at the image, or is it something different? Are we more external than that, or more involved?
I think she is unaware of the viewer and looking beyond the sort of present event. And I think, whereas the body is very present and it seems to be reacting to something that's happening right there and then, the face is in a different time, is away. And so there's two different forms of encounter going on in the painting.
And I mean, how do you relate to the erotic nature of kind of imagery, because I think, like, I mean, much is always said about elements of the male gaze in artwork and the sort of subversion of that, and obviously as a female painter depicting a female form, like you're not looking perhaps through that lens. But I mean, it's a really confronting image, and I would say it's not erotic in the sort of soft sense that kind of pertains to satisfying the viewer. It feels more direct and confrontational than that. But I guess there is eroticism underpinning it. Is that true?
I don't think. I think the eroticism in it perhaps is, the erotic is something that we, desire, something which seems, is seemingly sort of aspirational, perhaps. I think, I don't know, that's all perhaps uncertain for me, and there isn't a clear kind of reason. She is vulnerable, certainly, and I have been kind of thinking about the sort of we've all been contained and within our own rooms, and that has and I think that's kind of present in the painting, and all of this kind of imagery of the home and the sort of inner. I've been thinking about kind of shells and being inside, and it's so the covers of the blanket are something that she's emerging from, and that, I think, the nudity in it is her vulnerability, and I think she is uncertain of the eroticism of herself, and I don't think, and as I've said with the expression, she's not kind of inviting an erotic gaze either. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
I mean, you don't need to either. I mean, the image speaks really powerfully for itself. Anyway, one of the other pieces, I mean, so we haven't got all of the work obviously here, but I thought taking one of your other paintings that people might see in the exhibition, was a really powerful reminder of our kind of need for touch. I mean, that's there's no nudity in that image, but there felt like there was a huge amount of intimacy in it, kind of contact of two bodies. And I mean, is that something you've kind of been aware of throughout the lockdown as well, or did that influence the work or the choice of work in any way? The kind of the lack of touch or kind of human contact as
the lack of contact, and a lot of my work has been about relationships, and I think and this is why perhaps this one is odd, because all of the other paintings that I've done since lockdown have been multi-figure paintings, and the one that you mentioned, Huddle, it shows kind of 3 figures all kind of embracing, and yeah, there's that tension as well, and in that one I would say that the confrontation is with people, and then but I feel like there's a sort of pulling away of people as well in that painting, so that again, this sort of theme of opening and closures I think runs through the work.
That's really fantastic to get that insight. Thank you. We're going to move on to Eleanor Watson next. The Doors No Longer Hang True, number 2, I think, of there were 2 of a similar title. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I mean, just as far as kind of being able to get distance from work goes, I think walking around the imaginary exhibition, the online version, you definitely get the sense of seeing a complete image that, as you come closer, turns into this collection of brush marks, and kind of becomes almost abstract. And I mean, we were talking about the nature of kind of home and internal spaces before the talk started, but I mean, in that context, could you tell me more about this?
Sure. So in preparation for this talk, I was thinking about I guess my relationship to observational drawing being quite different, I think, in that I use photographic source material rather than kind of traditional observational drawing of spaces that I'm in. And I think that the drawing process from these photographs happens through making studies or sketches in oil or watercolor or ink or whatever, but there's a kind of transferal process, and I think the photograph really offers me I feel like inherent to all of my work is a form of escapism, and it's quite particular, but it's also quite layered, so there's like multiple forms of escape, and the drawing process from the photograph to making a painting offers me or enables me to explore those levels of escape through the material of paint, I guess. So I make, and the drawing itself are quite like reductive, so I'm really looking at how little I need to, how few marks I need to make to kind of describe something or give a feeling of something. So it's quite kind of analytical drawing process, so that it then gives me as little as I need to then go and play with paint, basically play with paint and what that can do and like the magic of that. So I think through that kind of reductive process, there's a kind of balance between kind of mark making and representation or like description, and then also this other world of paint and color and light and all of that. So I think that's and that kind of lends itself to that kind of figurative, abstracted push and pull. So that kind of that feeling of it, they're like looking at it and understanding the space, but then it also being a series of like splodges and like marks and color as well, and being something familiar and then unfamiliar all at once, being kind of inherent in the work. I think that was what you're asking me. I started talking and then immediately went off on a tangent, I feel like.
On a fantastic tangent. It was really, really interesting. And I wonder, kind of maybe stepping back along that tangent. So, you know, with this being the outcome and the kind of drawing being something that leads to this, with the photograph, are you taking all of those photos yourself? And where does that material come from? Where's the space as well? What does that mean to you?
So I don't actually, they're found photos. So
right.
there's a level of distance that I enjoy, and I think it's that leaping into and inhabiting and like dreaming of a space that I'm interested in, rather than them being attached to reality. So it really is about a kind of dream space or imaginative leap that I jump into these spaces. And I think I've been thinking a lot more about my process of making being the work, actually, and where the process of making and being in the studio and working in is the work, rather than it being a kind of description or describing the work. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was thinking about these kind of layers of escape, being like initially entering the studio as a kind of sanctuary, and also like leaving the house being exciting at the moment. So the studio itself being a kind of escape, and then the images I'm working from, these unknown spaces that I haven't been and don't know, also being a level of kind of inhabiting another world. And then there's this kind of like historical aspect of these spaces not being kind of everyday or the like world I actually live in, and then being some other kind of dream space. And then also like how the material then meets all of that, offers like so many more potential escapes, and each of those kind of decisions in making also being a kind of avenue to leave the present. So I think I've been thinking a lot about the process of making being kind of escaping in multiple ways all at once, and then allowing the viewer, I guess, like kind of allowing that process to be apparent a lot more, so that it's in the object, it's in the painting at the end of it, and invites the viewer into that kind of labyrinth of escape, if that makes sense ish. Yeah.
So is that that presence of process kind of betrayed in the mark making itself then? Is that in the sort of the rawness of the brushstrokes?
Yeah, I think so. And the kind of washing and daubs of colour being kind of reducing that kind of observational drawing process of reducing something down to its minimum, and then inviting material and colour and light, you know, and colour in. I guess it's where all the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of built up this sort of internal fantasy of the doors no longer hanging true, kind of being like I don't know, just a space in which you're really familiar with the physicality of that space, and you know the door, and you can almost kind of hear it as it clunks and doesn't quite shut properly. But as you're describing it, kind of being separate to the imagery that you've found, like is that an extra narrative element, like the title? I mean, what does that bring to the work, or where does that come from as well from you?
The title. I steal them from poetry and prose usually. So I normally make the work, and then when it comes to titling it, I'll have made notes of everything I've read in the past. I've continually making notes of what I'm reading, so I'll just get my notebooks and go back through and kind of circle things and think about things, and that's how I title them. So they're not my own words. I just steal poetic nuggets and title my paintings that way.
I mean, all art is stealing in some way, isn't it? I mean, you're just stealing images and pictures and shapes.
I'm not a linguist, so I asked for help with that one.
Poetic Nuggets Jake is the name of our next exhibition.
Well, Tim, you've now invited attention onto yourself appropriately, so I'm going to switch on to you. So thank you, Eleanor. Tim, the Red Room, I know you've spoken to me a lot before about encountering this room particularly, as well as you walk, the way you described it, kind of walking past and being struck by colour. And I know you've talked a lot about encounter in your own work. I mean, tell us about this painting and the body of work around it.
I think it's really interesting, actually, because it was really fascinating. It was really fascinating hearing Ellie talk then, because and maybe this is a really good reason for the exhibition in itself, in a sense, because when you can recognize in something someone else says, but then also see a complete opposite. And I think, Ellie, as you were talking then about a sort of reductive process and things, it was really interesting because and the escapism element, because I sort of felt like the opposite in a sense. Like I found I think for me a lot of paintings become about there's been a reductive process insofar as reducing it down to what is around me, because that I think for a big period of time I was at sea quite a bit, in terms of, not literally, but in terms of understanding what the heck I was doing in painting and something, you know. And I was I had to sort of go to a lowest common denominator, which was kind of like, I think when I'm with something, the painting happens. Like that was something I could sort of put my hand on, and actually it was kind of interesting, because I was looking at, I think for a long time I had to look at artists I really sort of loved, and I was always trying to work out what is it, you know, that I like about this and things, and there was something quite tactile about them, and really about sort of something made real, in a sense, and not real in a sort of just optical kind of way. It was, I think I was really interested in what it is to have a painted space, maybe. And this was in my old flat in Hackney, and my old housemate had left, and basically the door was open, and it just had these beautiful big red curtains, and you know, and I did a whole bunch of studies towards it, quite a few ink drawings, and a few oil paintings and stuff, and it's kind of funny, because I feel like it's almost like a dismantling of the place into kind of like movements, I think, and those are it's almost like if you were making a sculpture, it feels like the little bits of marble or whatever that drop off, they're like the drawings. I'm like, oh, that happened along the way, and it's kind of interesting, because I think for me that process is the thing that makes me want to realize it in a way that feels more final, maybe, or something. It's like I think I put it before, saying like if you're looking for it's like you're looking for its face or something, and all the stuff that leads up to the painting are the ones where you've gone, well, that isn't it, you know. And even though it has some aspect of it, so yeah. And I think in the actual painting process, I guess there is something where I feel like when I'm painting in situ, I start to respect the painting more, maybe. I start to feel like, because I'm a real indecisive kind of painter, and I think you know, so many wasted paintings where I've just gone, oh no, I don't believe I should be doing it this way, and I'll just be kind of rubbing it out or something. But whenever I'm there, I tend to do, when I come away from it, I think, oh, I should respect that, because that's a bit of experience or something of the place. It's almost like, I think it's just a way of me coping with alternative ways of working. I think, like a sort of way of going, well, I can't touch that because I don't have anything else to rely on. I need to leave that to dry, and then I'll go back and see if it's true, sort of thing. Yeah, does that make sense?
I think it adds a lot of context to this painting as well. Yeah, thank you. And actually, and leads us nicely, I think, maybe to the end of looking at all of these images and into talking about everyone's different relationship to these images and the experiences and the encounters that have led to them, or that underpin your practice. So I wonder if maybe you could lead some of that chat, Tim. So I'm going to kind of take us off of the screen share so we can just see our faces properly. Mm-hmm. And if anyone's got any questions, if anyone in the audience wants to ask any questions, by all means do pop them in the Q&A, and I'll throw them in at an appropriate moment. But but it sounds like everyone relates to the experience of the world of other people in very different ways through your drawings and paintings, either kind of very directly or indirectly through kind of gathering and recombining and kind of making these images. And I wondered whether we could maybe talk on that for a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, I think. And I mean, if I feel also duty bound, given I'm the person who sort of pulled these guys together, that I should sort of say something on that. I think I don't know, for me it's actually really fascinating hearing all of you guys, especially, and the thoughts you've got on it, because whilst we've had a lot of communication, it's really nice to hear stuff which you wouldn't normally just say in a conversation, you know, casually, about the work you make and stuff. I don't know, maybe this is actually a nice point for me to sort of say about how do you feel about I don't know, like what do you see in your work, you see in others? What have you noticed in the exhibition that's actually you've recognized? Like I was saying then about maybe with Ellie, like actually going, that's so interesting, because whilst I feel a recognition of something, there is also a difference in another way or something. Yeah. Maybe Ellie, you should take the lead on that, given I've pointed the finger at you.
I found it really interesting hanging it with you. I also think you were too self-deprecating earlier when you sort of shrugged off the fact that you curated it, because you actually made all the curatorial decisions. We just turned up and helped you hang it. So I'm not going to take any credit for the curating. But I found it really interesting when it came to putting it up, because I didn't make all of those decisions of which artists were going to be in it. So I was kind of like surprised at some, you know, like I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily jumped to pick the work that everyone, I mean, I really admire everyone's work. I have to add that in. But when it came to hanging it, it was really fun, because there were all like there were kind of threads running throughout the show, and there seemed to be kind of like 2 or 3 different schools of making within the show, which made it a really interesting thing. And I love the fact that basically anywhere that Rachel's work was, I wanted to put mine near it, even though I think our work is really different. They hang really interestingly next to each other. So that's not just me being sycophantic, but we do actually, all of our kind of throughout the show, we're next to each other. So I found that a really interesting process from kind of my painting, looking at where my paintings are sitting.
That was very funny, actually, I must admit, because we were hanging, we're like, oh, Rachel, who should we? Ellie. Yeah, every time. So that's the occasions when it happened. Rachel, what do you think about
that? Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it is funny how we do have these kind of different categories, or I don't know, it feels like I've put yeah, I mean, you and Ellie, I think there's similarities in the work, but not the process. Interestingly, you work so differently in terms of how you generate the imagery. I guess maybe work a bit in a more similar way to Michael and Joanna. We all kind of make a lot of imaginary drawings, and perhaps I would say now my practice has kind of transitioned from being purely observational and then to now, which is almost, well, I would say 80% imaginary. And then I'm going back to the drawing board, of course, that's an important part of it, going back and making work from observation, which then enriches the imaginative process for me. And so it's nice to see different approaches to that method within the show. Actually, Melissa is a good example of that as well. But yeah, and I think there's, I don't know, I think that Geraint has that wonderful, really direct taking from observation and then kind of weaving everything in like a tapestry and together to make these really large scale works which have so many things going on in them. It's so interesting how they all sit together, and I think that is partly because there's this sort of foundational interest in looking.
I think that's really true, and I think both what you and Ellie have said as well about sort of those three schools, somehow you can't really, it's almost like three concentric circles. You can't really define, like, pull them apart, but they are interlinked. So I probably think in the middle of those circles there is something to do with, like you said then, about coming back to the drawing board, and there's almost degrees of relationship with directness, I think, probably, which happens in everyone's work. And I think we're probably just discovering right now what the real theme of the show is, right, really. And I think you're right, actually, yeah, that's probably, I think you're probably on the apex of one of those circles, farthest away from an interlinking point in a sense, because it seems like the work you make has the boundary between imaginary or something is quite interesting because it exists, but there is so much of it is fundamentally about finding something. Would that be true in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing as well, I'm the only one who got away with just showing a drawing, not a painting. So. No, you're totally right. Like, we talk quite a lot, don't we, about this idea of like my obsession with thingness and like actually like nailing the object or the person down in some way, and then using that as a kind of like, I don't know, like a puppet show or something. Like I'm staging stuff, and then you know, being so sensation based in your painting, you know, in the way that you're making decisions in the moment and things. And I like that in this show there's that, it's like you say, the meeting ground of observation being such an important factor, and what we get out of it being so incredibly different. And yeah, I do feel on the edge of it, but also a massive part of the heart of it as well, you know. And I think we share a lot, certainly.
That's a great distinction to mention as well, the kind of the thingness and the sensation, that kind of string that goes between them as well. That's a wonderful distinction to make.
Thingness, another potential show name.
Thingness, there we are. Yeah, the follow-up, the sequel. There's actually a question just coming from Jane Miller for Rachel. Jane's just asked if, Rachel, you'd be able to say more about the narratives underpinning the figures in your paintings and kind of where they come from.
The narratives are largely autobiographical, and perhaps that's why it makes it so difficult to talk about them, without spilling my guts out over Zoom, which I'm not going to do, not tonight. But they largely come from autobiography through my own relationships, and so they are those paintings are a kind of direct reflection of how I've been feeling over lockdown, and so I think, yeah, thank you for asking.
That's great, thank you. And for Tim, I think from Hera, how did you find the balance between the poetic and figurative in the curatorial process?
Oh, Hera has good questions always. The balance between the poetic and
the figurative.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe that also, I don't know, I'm going to take a shot at saying it has something to do with like that, Jake, what you said a minute ago as well, pointing out that definition between sensation and thingness or something. I'm a bit flummoxed by that in a way. I feel like the figurative element, I mean, I suppose maybe that's an elephant in the room, is that everyone is in this, you know, in a sense. But I think in some ways it's not. It's like saying that's a tomato is a fruit or something. It's like, well, I know it is, but it's a tomato. You know, it's like it's a vegetable. I think it's one of my obscure metaphors, I think. So forgive me, everyone. But I think God, what a question. Some of the stuff, just going off the top of my head right now, and even as the four faces in this space, someone like Ellie and probably someone like Ellie, it's you again, like what I was saying about Geraint, about those concentric circles, like me and Ellie are probably on the far bit of one of them, because we lean quite heavy in a certain direction, perhaps, and that might be in that figurative sense. I think perhaps if we think about Rachel, Rachel, you were saying about imagination, and then there was someone like Joanna Gallego or Melissa Keim. There is some, and Michael Chance as well. There's something in there which is like, if by poetic you mean sort of in the sort of imagined kind of realm, in that way, that is something which is farther from those pieces of work like mine and Ellie's, and possibly Archie's as well, for his thingness, but I guess it's more that the poetry or the psychology of the work is just found in a different way. It's like with the thingness group, there is this kind of sense that, and I feel like I'm making arbitrary categories, but to make a point, I think with the thingness thing, it's the psychology or whatever is read into it by the fact that you're a witness to something. Ellie is looking, whether the source material is a photo or whatever, there is a sense that there is a viewer present observing something, and I think that's something I found as well. I really rely on a sense of, I need boots on the ground on one side of the canvas to make it feel like a window into a world, whereas with Geraint's, Rachel, the others, that sense of composition and bringing together, the poetry and the psychology kind of comes in the fact that they've made a tableau of an idea about something, so that I'm having to write about this right now, actually, and saying about, like, if you're standing in a room and you want to make a painting about still life, me and Ellie or something might go, let's paint that still life, whereas, Geraint or Rachel might go, what does it look like to have someone standing in a room looking at a still life? And that's probably, I'm sorry if I made a real crass oversimplification, Geraint and Rachel, but what I'm trying to say is there is this sort of, the poetry is there in all of it. It's just manifesting in quite interesting different ways.
I think that's a great answer. I'm going to squeeze two more questions in, but I'm finished maybe a couple of minutes late, because I think they're good questions. There's a question for you, Eleanor, from Lance. Just what influences you in picking a photo to work from? Are there any particular qualities, feelings, where they're found that influence you to work from a particular image?
It's a good question. I think it's one that I am constantly trying to answer, and I think I try and answer it through painting them often, because I kind of struggle to narrow it down. But I think there are definitely qualities, both formal and there are formal qualities that I'm really drawn to, like the quality of light within the space, but also a kind of light that dissolves objects. It both articulates them and dissolves them in some way, so they become kind of abstracted, that I'm particularly drawn to. Often a kind of colour that I think I could kind of make a mood from, or an atmosphere, kind of play with the colour combinations in the image. And also, I mean, the actual spaces themselves are, I think, they're kind of idealized in some way, so they are often historical. There's kind of a nostalgic feeling towards them, and particular objects have real resonance with me. So be it like china, often the quality of light falling on china has a kind of enchanting quality to me, and like candles and so particular objects will also draw me in. But I think mostly I try and work it out by making paintings, because I haven't really worked it out fully.
Fantastic, thank you. And so as a finishing question from Sebastian Chance, which I think has a nice little preamble to it. Tim, this is very much directed at you, Tim. You've put together a very interesting and complementary group of painters. Despite some of the differences in process, there's a definite relationship in the concepts and imagery employed. I think that's absolutely true. As a very brief answer, do you intend to show together as a group again?
I would love to. I've sort of put my head above the parapet with some of you guys saying, just trying to sound out whether that might be something that people would be interested in doing. And I think in a really nice way, I think the actual format, if anything, has legs, and that it's almost like we've got the apparatus set up now, and a sort of a good line of communication between each other, and I mean that also not just practically, but also sort of ideas wise, and especially even more probably cemented after this. So I'm game. Just got to see everyone else is.